Cut off. It's 7 o'clock.
You're live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to QuarenTime. Today is my very last day of college classes. Yay!
Woo-hoo!
It's crazy. I still have exams, but today was my very last day of classes forever. For as long as I want to not be in classes, I guess. So that's pretty crazy. Because of that and all the other things going on in life, I decided to do a simpler QuarenTime Live today. And so today I'm going to read you a book. This book is called Old MacDonald Had an Apartment House. And I think Mom helped me pick this book because it just feels appropriate for the quarantines, because it's all about Old MacDonald, and he has his whole farm inside his apartment house. And so if you're looking for something to do, you should feel free to, I guess, start a farm in your house in quarantine. So I'm going to read you this book. I told you it's called Old MacDonald Had an Apartment House, and it's written by Judy Barrett and illustrated by Ron Barrett. So here we go. I'm going to read it to you and then show you the pictures. So don't be afraid. I'm going to show you the pictures. The first page says, dedicated to all children everywhere, even those who hate vegetables. Old MacDonald lived in a big apartment house with his wife and their dog. He didn't own the building. Fat Mr. Rental did. Old MacDonald was its super. And here's the picture of Old MacDonald and his wife. He polished the brass doorknobs when they got smudgy, mopped up the hallways when they got dirty, and sent up steam when it got cold. That's what supers do. Old MacDonald's apartment was on the bottom floor and was very dark. The windows were covered by a thick, bushy hedge that grew in the front yard. Without sunlight, his wife's tomato plant grew pale and droopy. And here's the picture of Old MacDonald's apartment house. And you can see his wife has a tomato plant that looks sad. So, Old MacDonald decided to cut down the hedge in front of the windows. And there he is, cutting down the hedge. With all the sunlight that came in, the plant straightened up, grew a few leaves, and even grew a few tomatoes. There's the plant growing. But the spot where the hedge had been looked very empty. So Old MacDonald's wife suggested that they fill it with her tomato plant. And they did. It grew lots of new leaves, many more tomatoes, and much, much taller. So here's the picture of the tomato plant. Why not get rid of the rest of the hedge, Old MacDonald said. Then instead I could plant vegetables in the yard. They're better looking than the hedge and much better tasting too. So he cut the whole hedge down to the ground, and in its place he planted rows of corn and melons and beans and radishes. The fountain became a self-watering pea patch. The front yard had become a small farm, and the tenants were amazed. So I'll show you the picture again. There's the self-watering pea plants. One of the tenants, Mrs. Katz, really didn't need 4 rooms anymore. Her children were grown up, so she moved out. This is the saddest picture in the whole book. There's Mrs. Katz, and she's crying because she's so sad to move out of her apartment. I'm sure she wasn't really that sad. It's okay. It's just an apartment. It occurred to Old MacDonald then that an empty apartment would be a good place to grow lots more vegetables. He quickly moved in some soil and proceeded to redecorate in late vegetarian style. He laid down a carpet of carrots and cabbages and put some sweet potatoes where the couch had been and stuffed the closet with mushrooms. So here's all his plants growing in the apartment. Some days later, Mrs. Katz's downstairs neighbor, Mr. Hopkins, turned on a faucet and got hot and cold running sweet potato vines. Above his head, he could see carrots popping through the ceiling. He became furious. "Either that garden up there goes, or I go," he screamed at Old MacDonald. But Old MacDonald really didn't care. He had begun to feel that in some ways, vegetables made better tenants than people. Carrots didn't smudge brass doorknobs. Cucumbers didn't leave muddy footprints in the halls. And potatoes didn't bang on the radiators for more steam. Angry Mr. Hopkins moved out. Here's the picture of Mr. Hopkins and the carrots coming through his ceiling. A variety of vegetables, a field of clover, and a cow moved in. Here's the cow that moved in to Mr. Hopkins' apartment. No one knew what Old MacDonald was doing, but you can't keep a cow a secret for very long. And the neighbors, you see the neighbors are listening through the wall to the cow. More and more people moved out, very disgusted with what was happening. So more vegetables, fruit trees, cows, and chickens took their place. Finally, every tenant in the building had moved out. The apartment became a 4-story farm. And here's a picture. This is a good picture. It has lots of the animals. There's like a cornfield up here, and there's cows down here. And I don't know what's growing in this bathtub over here, but it's a pretty great picture. Then one day, fat Mr. Renthall, the owner, stopped by to check on the house and collect the rent money, as he did every few months. When he saw that his tenants had been replaced by vegetables, fruit trees, cows, and chickens, he got upset. Very upset. Here's Mr. Renthall in the hallway. There's a cow licking his face. "Look here, Old MacDonald, what have you done?" he shouted. "Where are the families? All that's here now are bushels of fruits and vegetables, herds of cows, and flocks of chickens, and they can't pay me rent." And there he is. He's by the call buttons, and there's different animals and vegetables that are listed on each floor in each room. Old MacDonald and his wife were very sad. They knew they would have to leave. Fat Mr. Renthall told them so. In fact, he was going to have the whole farm thrown out onto the street. Old MacDonald told his wife not to cry near her tomato plant because the salt water wouldn't be good for it. Besides, it set a bad example for the cows. So here's Old MacDonald with his cow, and they're crying. And there's his wife with her tomato plant. Fat Mr. Renthall paced back and forth quickly in front of the house. He was very upset and not really sure that he liked the idea of throwing out the farm onto the street. Old MacDonald had been such a good super. Now, not only was he without tenants, but he'd be without a super, too. "Who'd ever heard of a farm in the middle of the city? That's absurd," he muttered. "Or is it? Maybe a farm could pay me rent after all." So there he is, pacing and thinking, and he's carrying vegetables. The next morning, Old MacDonald and his wife stepped outside the house, carrying their suitcases, and in the middle of the front walk, Fat Mr. Renthall was building a store. There was a big sign that read, "Renthall and MacDonald's Fruits and Vegetables, fresh milk and eggs hourly." Fat Mr. Renthall waved at Old MacDonald and shouted, "Where are you going, partner? You grow the stuff and I'll sell it. Vegetables will pay me rent after all." And here's Old MacDonald and his wife and Mr. Renthall building the store. On opening day, the store was jammed. Fat Mr. Renthall made a very long speech in which he asked everyone to come in very often and buy as much as they could. He asked Old MacDonald to say a few words, and he did. He said, "People, I am happy to have such fine vegetables as tenants. I hope you agree that good vegetables make good neighbors. The people applauded and then began to buy as much as they could. They came back day after day. Both the store and the farm thrived throughout the summer and fall. And here's a picture of the store and all the people at the opening of the store. And even in winter, when the earth outside was frozen and covered with snow, things were still growing on the steam-heated farm. And there's the farm in the wintertime. And there's lots of animals and vegetables in the windows. And that's the whole book. So that was Old MacDonald Had an Apartment House, and I think it's a good book. I hope you all enjoyed reading a book with me today, and we will see you tomorrow for QuarenTime Queries. Am I off?
Now you are.